Hello, I'm Ed Fuquay, young adult librarian extraordinaire here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
And I'm Michaela, a human being here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
It's another episode of Booktalking, and today we're talking about Charles Dickens' Great Expectations.
Great Expectations. It's a novel full of great expectations.
It is, and thank you for recommending it because it is so much to unpack in this book. It is amazing.
There's a lot. As we were talking about in our previous book talk, just kind of, discussing Charles Dickens as a whole, about how even the smallest side character feels like a real, three-dimensional character within these novels. It's because everything is intertwined.
Yeah.
Everyone has a very elaborate backstory, even the most simple of characters.
I think his stories get filmed a lot, and actors love doing Dickens because there's so much meat to work with in his characters. You can just really dive into them.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to go with as far as this novel especially. All of the characters are intertwined with each other in some way or another, and they all have very, very deep backstory that's written in, and you have to. It feels like a mystery because every page.
He was fascinated by crime and mysteries, and this is in fact really just a mystery through most of its run.
Yeah, it is, and you're learning more and more as you go through. The book is narrated by the main character, so there's almost two versions of the main character within the novel. There's the main character who is living through all of this for the first time as a child, going all the way through adulthood, and then him looking back at himself as a child, going all the way through adulthood. But the story is it's certainly original for its time, and still I would say is a very original story. I don't think I've seen a really faithful reproduction that can get all of the details in the novel.
There's too much in the novel. You can hit the high points. And I have to admit, as someone who hadn't read it before you started recommending it, I was genuinely surprised by some of the things that happened in it.
Oh, absolutely. So we'll give you a little bit of backstory. I'll kind of give you broad strokes because this is definitely a novel. If you haven't read it, definitely go out, pick it up. It's definitely, I would recommend it for a nice summer reading. It'll certainly take you a good week. But the main character of the story is a boy named Pip. At least in the beginning of the story as it's being told, he starts as a young boy, an orphan. Dickens loved himself some orphans. So Pip is a young orphan, and he's sent to live with his sister, who is known as Mrs. Joe. Of course, her husband's name is Joe. Hence why she is Mrs. Joe. And they're pretty poor. Joe is a blacksmith. They're tradespeople. They're pretty low in society. A fellow, I believe it's also his uncle, Pumblechook, which is a wonderful name, basically takes Pip one day at the request of the mysterious Mrs. Havisham to come and play in her garden estate with her adopted daughter Estella, who is about Pip's age. Now, before we get into Estella and all that fun stuff, one day as Pip is walking through the kind of boggy cemetery near the marshes where he is living, he is set upon by a prisoner who is in shackles, who runs up to the young boy and starts threatening him right off the bat that he will have his associate rip out his heart and eat his liver if he does not bring this inmate file and some food to eat. So this is clearly somebody on the run. Pip, of course, complies because he's a little boy being threatened. He steals a pork pie, some brandy, and he gets a file and helps this nameless criminal out of his shackles. And the next day, of course, the criminal is then recaptured by the police and, brought away, but nothing to do with Pip. That will be important later in the story. So Pip is brought to this crumbling estate owned by the mysterious Mrs. Havisham to play with her adopted daughter Estella. This estate is very, very strange. The tables are laden with a rotting wedding feast. All of the clocks in the house have been stopped at 9:20 in the morning. And Mrs. Havisham herself is she's disheveled. She's wearing a rotting wedding dress, one shoe, and she is described as crazed. She was left at the altar in her younger days and has basically made time stand still within her crumbling manner. It's described as covered in cobwebs. It is the place that time has stood. No one has really touched this place except for Estella.
Yeah, at one point when Pip asked, what day should I come back, she said, don't talk to me about days.
Yes.
Yeah, she can't deal with time.
She cannot deal with time. She has some very deep trauma regarding time.
Oh, yeah, she has issues.
So, of course, Pip is playing with Estella. They form a friendship, and, of course, he has a little boy crush on her. He absolutely idolizes her. He wants nothing more in the world to be with Estella. That's really all he wants. Although he is a boy of no means, and Estella is being raised by a very, very wealthy woman, they are worlds apart. He knows that he'll never wind up with her. So it becomes his most fervent hope that maybe Miss Havisham would give him some money, make him a gentleman, and let him try to marry Estella. He basically sees himself as basically adopted by her as well, even though that is not at all the case. Miss Havisham has obviously been hurt by a man before and is essentially raising Estella to break as many hearts as she possibly can.
Yeah.
Pip is just kind of the first boy that she brings in to let Estella start to practice.
She's a man killer, and she practices on Pip.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So, some years pass. Estella is sent away to boarding school in France. So Pip's not really welcome at the estate anymore. Miss Havisham kind of dashes his hopes and sets him up to work as an apprentice with his Uncle Joe to learn blacksmithing. He kind of feels doomed to this life of laboring and never getting to be with Estella, this woman that he loves. Until one day, a lawyer named Jagger comes into town and informs Pip that somebody, a mysterious benefactor who he cannot tell Pip the name of, has left him a very large sum of money, and he needs to go to London to start learning the trades and becoming a gentleman. Now, this story does jump around. It's basically over several years, but Pip does. He goes to London. He makes a lot of money. And it does kind of become this corrupting force, all of this money in his life. It absolutely goes to his head.
The money that he never worked for and didn't earn.
No.
He has no idea what to do with it. It means nothing to him. He spends it like water.
Yeah, to the point where basically he spends and he spends and he spends until he's out of money. The debt collectors are on his tail. It's several years go by. It just really corrupts him to the point where he at one point was trying to become a gentleman for kind of pure reasons, love. It's now become he's no different than any of these other gentlemen. Just kind of
when he encounters Joe again, Joe the blacksmith who raised him and is a decent, salt of the earth person with no flaws. He considers himself better than Joe because he's rich now.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There's a great quote, and we'll go into it later in the book, where I saw myself and Joe as equals, but now that I have gained some humility, I now admire him. So it's very strange. But anyway, it's all a veneer, because he really doesn't have any money. The debt collectors are after him. It's just his own inflated sense of self-importance that makes him think that he's better than all these people that he was raised with and took care of him for a very long period of time. He does wind up going back to the marshes because his sister has passed away. She was attacked and after, being an invalid for some time has passed away. So he returns home for the funeral. It's around that time where he finds out who the mysterious benefactor is who has been giving him all of this money. And it's a character by the name of Abel Magwitch, who is the criminal that he helped.
Yes, the nameless criminal that he helps.
It is the nameless criminal that he helped, who, after his escape attempt, was sent to Australia and actually wound up making a lot of money. And even though now Pip knows where all this money has come from, because he has built it up in his head that it was Miss Havisham. I'm destined to marry Estella. Miss Havisham is giving me all this money. That's who it must be. He no longer wants any more of Magwitch's money. He refuses it, which means his debts are unpaid still. He's refusing help from this person who is a convict because he sees the convict is lower than him. Although after learning some more things about Magwitch, you find that Magwitch is also kind of just a victim of circumstance. There are larger forces at play here which have caused him to fall into such lowly circumstances, even though he has made the best of a bad situation.
And he has become wealthy.
Yeah, he has become very, very wealthy.
And made Pip's dreams come true.
He has made Pip's dreams come true, and Pip really only meets him with disgust until he learns more about this character. It's just about how this money that, this little boy helped me. I want to make his dreams come true. And it's just met with disgust and revulsion. And how could you do this to me? So at this point, of course, Pip is grown. Estella has grown, and she's back in town. Mm-hmm. She's, playing the field, breaking as many hearts as she possibly can, and basically trading up until she gets the best possible match for her. And she winds up marrying, which completely destroys Pip.
Drummel.
Drummel.
Yes, the odious Drummel.
Drummel, yes, and he's a horrible, horrible man. So, after Estella marries Drummel, Pip is devastated. He has, no prospects, no money. Joe, who is this hardworking, salt-of-the-earth man who really only has the best intentions for Pip, that's the person who really has his back. Joe pays off all of Pip's debts. And Pip kind of realizes, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be with people who actually care about me. Joe doesn't have much, but he uses what he has to just get Pip out of a bad situation because he's always kind of thought of him as a son. Mm-hmm. Of course, more time passes. Pip kind of becomes, a little more down to earth. Some shenanigans happen with Magwitch, where, of course, he was banished from England, sent to Australia. He's not supposed to be back in England.
It's the death sentence if you return to England automatically.
It is a death sentence if you're recognized, which he is. And you learn more about Magwitch, of course, then. But too much, like I said, too much stuff to unpack for broad strokes. But Estella's terrible husband has died after years and years of abuse. I should go back a little bit. Miss Havisham. Oh, Miss Havisham. Of course, Pip has to confront Miss Havisham, who is actually very remorseful, seeing the pain that Pip has gone through, that she has caused by corrupting Estella. She realizes instead of getting revenge on, men of the gentry, she was really just hurting an innocent like she was, and she begs Pip for his forgiveness. Of course, Pip forgives her because he's learned some humility at this point, and she wanders too close to the fireplace in her tattered old dress and goes up in flames. She survives that, though. And it would have been cleaner just to let her die, but no, she survives that and is invalid for the rest of her days. But yes, everything is left to Estella. He comes back after Miss Havisham's death. She's kind of just wandering this crumbling, frozen in time, disgusting estate that is just falling apart. And although there are alternate endings, and the ending that was published, they wind up together. They will never part. That's how it ends. He wishes never to be parted from her.
It's a bittersweet ending. I don't want to argue with you, but the first ending, in which they don't get back together, they went into each other after a space of 11 years had passed, and they've grown so distant they no longer have anything in common, and now Estella has remarried to a doctor, and she's living a comfortable middle-class existence, and she's just an ordinary person. And that was the ending where they don't get together, so he rewrote that as the ending where they do get together, and even the way he ends it, I took her hand in mine, we went out of that ruined place, and so forth and so forth. I saw no shadow of another parting from her. And yet, literally, the paragraph before that, she says, we will always be friends apart. Really? And then he says, I see no shadow of a separation. No shadow of a separation isn't they lived happily ever after. That is so not a really happy ending.
No, it's not at all. But for some of these characters, it's as happy of an ending as one could expect, especially.
Presumably, they've been through so much.
There have been a lot of hurt feelings.
A lot of emotions there. When it's filmed, and it's frequently filmed. It's been filmed over a dozen times, and Hollywood is determined to A, make it a love story, and B, give it a happy ending.
It really is not supposed to be a love story. Love is supposed to be, a boyhood crush is supposed to be the driving force, the pure intention that gets corrupted over time.
Well, some critics say that the original ending is the truer one because Pip doesn't deserve to have her in the end. He hasn't,
No, he shouldn't be rewarded. He shouldn't get the object of his affections at the end.
But Pip is fundamentally a good, decent person.
Yes, his morality is, spot on. As a little boy, he's a very just and good
character. He instinctively risked his neck saving the life of this guy who was clearly a convicted criminal with no hope that it would ever pay off in the long run.
And it winds paying off splendidly.
Yeah, that's an act of true charity when you know it'll never really count for you, can only count against you. And then one thing that struck me was Magwitch is on the run from the law and has to flee England. And so Pip, even though it's against the law to harbor a fugitive, Pip risks his life again to help Magwitch, because Magwitch has done so much for him. Pip doesn't hesitate to drop everything and stick his own neck out to save Magwitch.
Yeah, but in doing so, he gets the opportunity to learn more about Magwitch as a person. Magwitch is from a really the same kind of background as Pip is. Low class, low income, tattered clothes. Magwitch basically gets swept up with this man who has a lot of money. And they're running illegal letters back and forth. By the way, the person he goes into illegal business with is actually the person who stands Miss Havisham up at the altar.
That was the one who stood up Miss Havisham.
She's the one who stood up Miss Havisham at the altar, who was working with Miss Havisham's half brother, who was a bastard, who wasn't going to inherit anything. It's a very complicated plot. It feels like a soap opera.
Yes.
Going back and reading it feels like a soap opera.
He wrote popular fiction. This is meant to appeal to the common folk. So it's a soap opera.
It is absolutely a soap opera. But Magwitch is just, somebody who, for the most part anyway, he was definitely the more innocent party, had good intentions, but because he was lower class, the day that they go to court, his partner in crime dressed really well, got a really expensive lawyer. Magwitch came in workman's clothes, kind of dirty, clearly less educated, less wealthy than this other person. Magwitch's name is mentioned more in the letters, and it's kind of it's a commentary as well as on the justice system, because Magwitch is actually less guilty than his wealthy counterpart. But the wealthy counterpart gets 7 years in prison, and Magwitch gets 14.
Yeah. Well, as a court clerk, Dickens saw this all the time in the real court system, so he knew exactly what he was writing about. The courtroom scenes really ring true in this one. And of course, Jaggers, the lawyer, is such a great character.
Oh, Jagger, I love Jagger.
He's so completely deliciously amoral.
Oh, yeah.
He's not really a bad guy, but he still manipulates people's lives behind the scenes.
He's like a cartoon of a lawyer.
Yeah,
it's just every negative stereotype you've heard. They're slimy. They're going to use their charisma for their own gain. Absolutely. That's Jagger.
One critic compared him to Billy Flynn in Chicago.
Yes, that's exactly. That's exactly what he feels like. They're all great characters, and it's because he writes them with such depth, and he gives them those backstories. You give the audience information on all of these characters, so they really feel like they are immersed in the world with all these characters. But yes, and then of course, Miss Havisham jilted at the altar. I love talking about her. She's so crazy.
Well, she's not a bad guy either. I mean, she does kind of horrible things, but she realizes she's done wrong. She never meant to destroy Pip. And I don't think she meant to screw up Estella all that much either.
It starts with totally pure intentions. They write about it. He writes about it. When she initially adopted Estella, it was which you find out later that Estella is actually Magwitch's daughter.
Estella is Magwitch's daughter. Yes.
But Estella is this. She starts out as pure. She's a child. There's really nothing wrong with the children in these novels. But Estella is pure, and Miss Havisham has pure intention. She means to, raise a child, but protect her from the things that hurt Miss Havisham.
But to armor her against the slings and arrows that men will toss at her.
Yeah, exactly. So she sees a vulnerable young girl, and she kind of projects like, I was once that. Let me save you from all the things that I have gone through. But as she grows, older and more beautiful, and she realizes the effect that Estella's beauty has on the gentry, the gentlemen in the area, she turns that into a corrupting force. She starts to play with Pip.
She goads Pip about how attracted he is to Estella. And I don't think she means anything wrong by it, but of course she twists his entire life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the quotes in the novel, which I think is just the meanest thing in the world to say to a child, is after Estella goes to school in France, Miss Havisham eagerly asks Pip, "Do you feel that you have lost her?" Excitedly. Yeah. She's just, you lost. you lost. And it's just that, she has been, men have caused pain to her.
Yeah.
She just wants to give it right back. It feels like justice to her, even though she's harming an innocent.
Yeah.
And it's not until much later that she realizes, oh, I corrupted a child.
Yeah. Oh, dear.
Oh, dear. Yeah,
well, she drops to her knees and begs forgiveness from Pip. She really does when she realizes how awful
even as
been.
she's wounded and, covered in burns, she's begging Pip for forgiveness. She's like, please, write it down. Write down that you forgive me.
Yeah.
She knows that, in her dying moments, she needs some form of redemption. She knows this is the worst thing that she has ever done. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love Miss Havisham.
Some of the things, reading critics' reviews of it, a couple of things leapt out. One of them is, someone pointed out that there is almost no light in the book.
Yeah.
It is never sunny or bright. One time the sun shines, and that's the day that Joe and Biddy are married.
I never realized that when reading. Yeah, no, it's a very dark book.
Yeah, it is a dark book. It is always raining. Even the streets of London, is filthy and grimy.
Yeah.
Even though he's rich and lives in a good part of town, the streets always look terrible.
Yeah.
And Dickens, with his skill for words, never describes London as being beautiful or bright, ever. The sun just never comes out in this book.
No, it's just as gray in London as it is in the marshes.
Yeah.
It's just as gray, and it's because, men are corrupt wherever you go. That sunny day for Joe and Biddy. Biddy is a minor character who comes in towards the end of the book, but she's very good. She's a good-natured, good person who winds up married to Joe, who deserves just reward in his life. So it would make sense that it would be sunny on their wedding day. I like that.
Yeah. This book was written when Dickens was at his most successful.
Mm-hmm.
And he had actually had enough money to go back and buy the dream house he saw as a little kid when he grew up in that town in Cornwall. And this is set basically in that town.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But it's not an autobiographical novel in any real sense. But reading it, I can't help but wonder. Now, Pip suddenly has all this not fame, but he has a lot of money thrust upon him and makes himself into a gentleman. Now, Dickens had grown up in a very poor background and had found himself suddenly lionized by the public and suddenly found himself very rich. He had fulfilled all of his dreams, including buying his dream house. And at this point, he was breaking up with his wife and had fallen in love with an 18-year-old girl. And so I found myself wondering now, is Dickens pondering about his own life? Because money does not make Pip happy. Love does not make Pip happy, ever. And so is Dickens asking himself, is this really what I want? Is my life turning out the way I wanted it to? Which Pip has to ask himself. Yeah. Good old Joe never questions the value of being a good blacksmith and a decent human being.
Yeah.
But Pip has to go through a lot to look at himself in the mirror and say, this is not the person I want to be.
Yeah, it's definitely not autobiographical, but I can see it he's at a point where he's reflecting on the whole of his life.
Yeah.
Obviously, he was going through some stuff when he was writing this.
Yeah.
But in the end, what kind of brings Pip back is just being around the common folk, being around salt-of-the-earth people, good people. And Dickens has moved back to his hometown.
Yeah.
Maybe that's, in the end, what kind of brought him back, you know? Just being around good people. That's the secret.
Today, it's a huge tourist attraction.
Yeah.
Stas's house, Miss Favisham's place, is based on a real place. It has a plaque on the wall saying,
it really?
Yes. He described it very well.
But are all the clocks stopped at?
I don't know. Probably not. But there's tons. You can buy any kind of Dickens memorabilia in that place that you want. But yeah, it's really fascinating, and it's not a Hollywood kind of book. It doesn't have a happy ending, really. Like they get together in the end in the published version, but even then it's very melancholy.
Yeah.
One thing that I hated, being the kind of guy that I am, I love strong female characters, and seeing Miss Faversham begging for forgiveness, even though she has done horrible things, that really kind of bothered me. And in the version that was printed, Estella basically, her Drummond wound up abusing her. She was physically abused, and he later died, so she was free from him. He couldn't get divorced in that time. But she has been broken by life. She literally says she has been broken by the suffering that she went through. And as horrible a person as she was, I didn't want to see Estella broken either.
Yeah, no, she's also just a kind of a victim of her upbringing.
Yeah.
Miss Havisham has twisted her the same way she has twisted Pip. She's the puppet master. She was pulling the strings all along.
Yeah.
She's put Estella on this course of course she's going to, just go for the biggest dollar sign and not for, a kind human. In the end, they describe her, all of her haughtiness, everything that had made her so disdainful towards Pip had kind of just been broken down into a sad kind of a sad kindness.
Yeah, we don't see it happen, but obviously she's been completely crushed by life. And I thought that was so horrible. I really hated that.
No,
Maybe
it's absolutely horrible.
But it's...
You can't say, I couldn't say anybody deserves that.
An abusive relationship.
Maybe to be embarrassed in public maybe once, but certainly not that. But it changes her as a character, so she now fits into Pip's world.
Yeah. Yeah, Estella means star, of course.
Yes.
And she was cold and distant and untouchable.
She's cold, distant, untouchable, out of Pip's reach.
Out of Pip's reach, always,
Constantly. No, that's why he obviously picked that name. And then you've got Joe, who I think the name actually means blacksmith. But he's like fire. He's of the earth. Those are the two. You've got out here in space and down here warming you on Earth. Yeah,
and when Pip has gotten deeply in debt, it's Joe who spends his entire life savings paying off Pip's debts without blinking an eye.
Yeah, he's like
loses everything just to save Pip from going to debtor's prison.
Yep.
As in real life, Dickens' family went to debtor's prison.
Yep.
So it's full of fascinating, complicated characters. It's a long book, though it's not as long as some of Dickens' others.
Yeah, no. This is the weekend reading.
This is written at kind of like the midpoint of his career. He got a lot of things out of his system, but he's really hitting his stride as an author, which is why it's filled with so many fascinating characters, like one after the other.
Oh yeah, no. Every single character is so three-dimensional. Why do you think this book is still so popular?
I don't know. I think the class system that he's writing about still exists in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. The distinction between the upper class and the lower class, and Pip's desperate desire to better himself is a universal feeling. And we've all fallen for that girl that we can't have.
Yeah.
So again, it's very sympathetic, although he's created a world that's so dark and twisted that I think the lessons that Pip learns don't necessarily apply to us. Although not necessarily,
It's a soap opera.
Yeah.
Some of the things that happen are just so out there, but the core lesson itself is something universal and human.
You identify with Pip less as he gets older, probably because he's corrupted by his money. But I also ask myself, looking at the plot, he has all this money given to him which he didn't really deserve or earn. And yet he also risked his neck to save a guy who was an escaped convict. So in a way he did earn it.
Yeah.
Magwitch says, "You fed a starving man." Yeah.
It's kind of like, going back, any sort of like symbolism, other stories this kind of happens with. It's almost like biblical, when Jesus is like, when you feed the hungry, you feed me, and you will be rewarded in the kingdom. But now you're being rewarded in the material world for a good deed that you don't even remember.
But it's not really what makes him a better person.
No. It's, becoming a better person is not, getting so much money, accomplishing, these monetary, physical, these levels. It's really just becoming humble.
He's a good person when he's a little kid. He becomes a worse person when he gets older and has to regain what he had lost as a kid. Yeah.
No, absolutely. He becomes just like any of those, just like Estella's first husband, just a jerk. Yeah. Point blank, he becomes a jerk. Money corrupts him. The forces that are educating him, they're not teaching him to be a good person. They're teaching him how to be, financially stable. Not to say that you can't be financially stable and a good person. It's rare within a Dickens novel.
Particularly.
The really only character who has money and is somewhat decent is Magwitch, who is a convict. I think he might be the only character in a Dickens novel who has a lot of money and freely gives it away.
Yeah. He worked hard for it. He was a sheep farmer.
Yeah, he was a sheep farmer.
Ranch and made a fortune off of it,
No, lots and lots of hard work. He's he's aged very poorly because of the amount of work that he has done on the sheep farm.
And he risked his life to come back just to see how Pip is doing.
Yeah.
It cost him his life in the end.
It does. Yeah. But they also say that the reason he did that is because Pip reminded him of the child that he thinks is dead because they're the same age.
Dead. Yes.
And that's kind of all he has. Yeah, no, it's a wonderful book. Wonderful.
Definitely.
Wonderful
highly
dark
recommended.
book, but
Yeah, it's been filmed several times, and several of the filmed versions are very good, although be careful. Avoid the Gwyneth Paltrow version.
yeah, no, it's
awful.
It's a movie of the same title as the
Yeah.
novel.
The 1943 David Lean one was just classic, brilliantly filmed one. So, all right, any final notes?
Final notes, if you get stood up at the altar, clean your house, change your clothes. It's okay. You'll get through it.
You'll get over it. Yeah, it's horrible, but tomorrow is another day.
Tomorrow is another day. Yeah, that's great expectations.
Great expectations, exactly. So we'll be back next time. This has been Book Talking. We'll be back next time with another great book. Till then, I've been Ed.
I've been Michaela.
Take care and be safe.
Be happy, be healthy. Bye.
Bye.